Oh, now it's active. It's okay. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear everybody else, dear friends of Ernst, colleagues who are really taking care. My name is Alexander Damjanic. I'm head of the unit Support Art and Research and director of the Zentrum Fokus Forschung here at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. It's a great pleasure for me to open this event together with Ernst and give you just some welcoming words, also on behalf of the rectorate. So let me just start with what I scribbled down here. When you go to an art university to talk about crude oil, it might seem strange, but this is what is needed, as it is about a lot. It is about fundamental conditions of current self-evident things that are and need to be addressed. It is about places, standpoints, when you talk about crude oil. It is about the in-between, about movement when you talk about oil. It is about resources, the natural resources, the so-called natural resources, and the virtual resources which go in hand with that. So it is about much more than the obvious. The strange is needed. These leaps of thought alone show that much more than the obvious, as I said, is needed to reach out to the heart of matter. Change needs to be embraced. And I believe that Ernst Logar, is to be thanked for getting to the heart of it, and has been doing so for around 20 years, also regarding that very topic, with his rigorous artistic research practice, looking for the strange in the obvious. And there is another aspect, in addition to the urgent thematic interest, also focusing on the tragic conditions of climate and war at the very moment. That such an endeavor is central here, located at Art University. The artistic research practice itself, which is so interesting to have it here at this institution. Art and research combine at the Angewandte when art unfolds its transformative potential of understanding, and this meets a reflexive ambition of understanding transformation. So it's about the transformation of understanding as an artistic practice and the understanding of transformation as a reflective mode. Then a project on crude oil, an event like the one we are opening today, is more than in the right place here and its community, amongst its community, to take up the challenge of taking things differently. But in addition to the researchers, the colleagues, I cannot mention them all by name. It is not only the institutions like the Angewandte that offer, or the Montana University Leoben, which is a cooperation partner of that very event, offer a space and a milieu of challenge and trust that makes such a project possible. The provision of supplementary funds is also extremely important so that the research can take place at all. It is a pleasure for me to refer to the PEAK funding, the Program for Arts-Based Research, which is based and hosted by the Austrian Science Fund, and which provides the funds for this very project, in particular, to be able to work. It cannot be pointed out often enough that this program, which was created especially for the community using artistic methods for exploration, is unparalleled internationally, and it cannot be thanked often enough that this exists. But the most sincere thanks and the most eager curiosity are now directed towards the coming program and the topic of joint discussion, so to all of you contributing to that. And it has all been made possible and put together with incredible commitment and speculative originality of Ernst Logar and his team. Ernst, thank you for that. So on behalf of the Angewandte, I wish you a great event, and that in the end, precisely the self-evident will be understood differently entirely in the sense of the transformation of understanding and the understanding of transformation of art and research. I wish you a great event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for your welcoming speech. So welcome everyone to the opening of the Reflecting Oil Colloquium here in the atrium of the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. I'm happy to be here and will say a few words about myself as an initiator of the Colloquium and the Reflecting Oil project as a whole. But firstly, a brief roadmap for tonight's event. After my introduction to the project and the Colloquium, the performance of the choreographer and dancer Kat Válastur will start. Kat Válastur lives in Berlin and has developed a performance for this event together with Mia Lieke. Mia is 14 years old and she is part of the German junior squad and holds the current young championship in tires. Tonight's performance is also a collaboration of Kat Válastur, Thomas Grill and myself. Thomas Grill is a sound artist, teaches and conducts research at the University of Music and Performing Arts, Vienna. He produced the sound for the performance. I realized his special installation with the two substances, honey and crude oil for it. After the performance, I will invite you to the auditorium where Cleo Rees will give her keynote speech. Cleo Rees is a member of the First Nations community in Fort McMurray, the center of the Canadian oil sands industry in north of Alberta. Cleo will give us her insight into this industry and her province. After her speech, we will begin with our panel discussion, which will be facilitated by Alejandra Rodriguez Remedy, a researcher based at the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, and a Reflecting Oil team member. Afterwards, there will be time for socializing, for informal introduction and discussions. In addition to the usual drinks, we will also offer a special petro drink based on the recipe of Brazilian artist Mari Fraga. Tonight's event will close at 10 p.m. Now I would like to talk a little bit about my approach, crude oil, to the research project and the Colloquium. In other words, what to ask, how did I get addicted to oil? In 2008, I was invited by Peacock Visual Arts, an art center in Aberdeen, to spend 2 months on a residency there and developed work about the oil industry. Aberdeen on the northwest coast of Scotland is known as the oil capital of Europe. My initial approach for the work was to obtain access to highly restricted locations connected to the offshore oil industry. I began to reach out to oil companies, hoping to eventually gain access to their onshore facilities and hopefully also to a drilling rig out in the North Sea. I contacted roughly 60 companies, and putting it mildly, even extracting photography permits proved extremely difficult. I moderate success and was able to visit a handful of spaces, but the majority of the companies, especially the larger ones, refused outright. Thus, unable to access the most important locations of the North Sea oil industry, I shifted my focus to the substance of crude oil itself. I began to appropriate the substance as a medium in works that reflect upon our civilization's dependence on the resource of oil. So one of my key works of my Invisible Oil project in Aberdeen is Reflecting Oil Mirror. I would like to now to quote Alejandra's text from my publication, Invisible Oil. This work consists of a mirror built as a large framed perspex box equipped with an oil pump that sends crude oil pulsing through it. In this mirror of flowing oil, we simultaneously encounter ourselves and our culture. Reflecting oil reminds us that our society is founded upon oil's flow. Millions of barrels are pumped daily through pipelines or transported in other ways, a flow that makes our contemporary life possible. Those material conditions and the products we make end up in turn shaping us because they determine our daily habits in ways that we seldom directly perceive. End of quote. So this work, the Reflecting Oil Mirror, is the basis and the starting point of the current project, Reflecting Oil, art-based research on oil transitionings, which was supported by the Austrian Science Fund. During this project, my artistic research is focused on engaging with the substance of crude oil and the omnipresent petroculture connected with this substance. Since the beginning in 2019, I have been cooperating on this research project with the Department Petroleum Engineering, and particular with Professor Holger Ott and his team at the Universität Leoben. The goal of the research is to connect crude oil, usually an abstract concept in our society, in its material substance to its manifestations, and to make those manifestations visible and tangible. A key moment in this project is the cooperation of art and science, and to eliminate of crude oil in an interdisciplinary approach from multiple perspectives. So since the start of the project, we have invited around 30 experts from a wide range of fields for online discussions to get to know their perspectives on crude oil and to think about the complex connections and significances of this substance in our global world. Working together with the team of the Department Petroleum Engineering is a very exciting process, as two worlds of art and science collide. At the start of our collaboration, we had to get to know our different ways of working and seeing, to learn more about the different ways of thinking and approaches, and to build trust. From my point of view, it's a very interesting but also challenging process. Today, practically at the halfway point of the project, there are still periods when we do not understand each other and have to look for a common language. However, despite those differences, there are also many commonalities in our thinking, as there is no black and white in thinking about crude oil, but mainly shades of gray. During the last 2 years, when the pandemic did not upend our plans, we conducted experiments with crude oil in the labs of the department. At the start, we wanted to understand the scientific experiments and their parameters and get to know the laboratory operation. Now the project is in its second phase, and I'm trying to change the crude oil experiments with artistic strategies in order to introduce symbolic, cultural, and social levels into the experiment, and thus produce relevant reflections and question about life during petromodernity. A further focus of the artistic research is on the sensory qualities of the substance, such as the smell of oil, which has little importance in petroleum science. As there is no vocabulary for the smell of crude oil, I'm trying together with 2 scientists from the University of Vienna and the University of Veterinary Medicine Vienna to approach this topic in small doses. Other sensual perceptions like touch, color, and toxicity are also on the task list of the project. Ultimately, the goal is to create a direct connection to the omnipresent substance that is oil. In my artistic works, at the end of the project, I want to create this real connection. Those works will pose pertinent questions about how the resource is used and point towards our subjectivity as one dominated by oil. I think it is very important to understand how this particular source of energy shapes our society and ourselves. This understanding is the starting point for and the basis for a successful transformation towards new and more sustainable forms of energy. As I already mentioned, this colloquium is a major element of the Reflecting Oil project. In the course of the pandemic, we could engage in online conversations and debates with many experts. Now, fortunately, we can bring many of them here to Vienna to meet in person and continue our shared work on this subject. So, thank you very much for coming. So I will say a little bit about the colloquium, about the workshops. in three working groups with different formats. We will together engage with this very topical and relevant subject area, and I hope develop interesting outcomes. The workshops during the 3 days are not open to the public, but the results of the colloquium will be published on the project website, and the publication about the project to be published in 2023. So we have developed the following three working groups. Group 1, it's the art-based research group. This workshop in the laboratories of the University of Applied Arts addresses in artistic experiments how to materially engage with the substance of crude oil using artistic research methods. In doing so, a range of experiments with crude oil will be carried out, and the qualities and behavior of crude oil will be interlinked with symbolic, cultural, and social interpretations in order to raise important questions about the significance of oil, and also to develop new knowledge. I will facilitate this workshop. Unfortunately, Leonhard Gruber from the University of Applied Arts, he got sick, so I will run the workshop by myself. The participants are Elisabeth Dokolil, Marina Fraga, Patrick Jasek, Kares Abdulhamed, Herwig Steiner, Herwig Turk, and Andrei Molotkin. So the group 2, it's the academic group in the workshop about the visibility, invisibility of crude oil as a theoretical text about the consequences of the visibility or conversely invisibility of crude oil in its cultural representation and social perception will be developed. In this group, the shared process of reflection shall lead to a collective text and perhaps also image production. This workshop will be facilitated by Alejandra Rodriguez, and the participants are Pete Arnold, he's not here, he will come tomorrow, Simone Gingrich, Jordan Kinder, David Misch, Ariana Mundin, George Osodi, and Benjamin Steininger. Unfortunately, curator Elena Sorokina, who intended to join us from Paris, had to cancel her participation on short notice. So I come to the last working group. It's the group 3, the narrative group. The workshop which deals with the transition out of the petrol age is dedicated to the development of a graphic novel. This creative narrative format will encourage imagining a future after oil. In this format, participants will try to get closer to the process of change towards a post-oil era in a speculative manner. In doing so, each participant will develop a character which plays its part in the plot and shapes the graphic novel in dialogue with the others. So the participants are Amanda Bötzkes, Kinga Kilczynska, Holger Ott, Cleo Rees, Johannes Schmidt, and Janet Stewart. Ulrike Bayerhofer from the University of Applied Arts will facilitate this workshop together with artist Olaf Osten. Ulrike will take on moderating while Olaf will draw the graphic novel. The three workshops are all linked by an experimental and unconventional approach, and I'm already very excited to see the outcomes. So I will. I tried to explain the colloquium, and now I will come to today's performance. In conclusion of my introduction, I would like to say a few words about artists Kat Válastur and Thomas Grill and the performance. As I mentioned earlier, this performance is a collaboration of Kat Válastur, Thomas Grill, and myself. Kat Válastur developed the choreography and the concept for the performance. Thomas Grill provided the sound and showing the oil and honey installation, which deals with circulation systems and the symbolism of the substances. So before we start with the performance, please, we need that this wall is free, and so you can be at the left and the right side. So I just check if yeah, okay. So I quote from Kat Válastur's text about the performance. In the petrochemical performance, spilling melancholy, a ring full of crude oil revolves around a young athlete of gymnastics. As we experience her together with the ring, we can speculate that the ring could rotate by its own autonomous action or by the athlete's body. We can feel the dependency of the two elements, the oil ring and the young athlete. The way of relation reflects the degrees with which the world is flagellated by oil. So thank you for this wonderful performance. Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Kat. So let's move to the auditorium. We will continue with the speech of Cleo Rees. So please take a seat, and then we will continue with Cleo Rees' speech. You want to, yeah, here we will have, yeah. Can I put the water instead? Yeah, please. Yeah. Perfect. So everything worked with your slide? Good. Great.
Great. You did it. You did.
So, okay. Cleo Rees will have her speech, her keynote speech here. So I will say a few words about Cleo. Cleo Rees is Cree and Fort McMurray First Nation member. She has worked as an adult educator and has been involved in Cree language revitalization and oral history. 2011, she was elected as a counselor for the Fort McMurray First Nation and served for 3 years. Cleo coordinated the healing gathering for the land, water, and people from 2015 to 2018. There I met Cleo, it was in 2016, I remember. The healing gathering focused on cultural, mental, physical, and emotional healing. As the founding director of the Keepers of the Athabasca Watershed Society, she is currently the co-chair and involved in their many activities. In addition, she is an elder advisor on the Amarat project, which brings together a team on a 6-year project with the focus on global biodiversity and the health and well-being of indigenous people, led by the University of Alberta and indigenous partners. So please, Cleo, come.
Good evening, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here this evening. We talked about this a couple of years ago, and now it's a reality, and it's very exciting to have this this time together, and to see the actual project that Ernst has been talking about for years to come together. So I would like to thank Ernst and his wonderful team for all the work that you've done, and also for inviting me to this event. So I want to say hello, Kinanas Komtin. Thank you for bringing me here. My name is Cleo Desjardins Reese, and as Ernst said that I am from the Fort McMurray First Nation, and that is located in northern Alberta. If everybody knows where that is, it's northeastern Alberta. And I have been back in my home territory since 2006. I lived in BC and British Columbia and other places, and finally moved back at that time, and became involved in my own community and what is going on in the region. I became part of a growing environmental movement in the north in Alberta. When I got there, the whole oil industry was very much in place. There is no square inch of land that has not been leased out to some oil company. So we have seen a lot of changes in our lifetimes in that area. And because we're talking about oil, I would like to say that to us, yes, there is oil, and that comes from death. It comes from underneath, far underneath the surface of the land, and from animals and plants that have died over the millions and millions of years. But you can't talk about oil without talking about water. And that is a very important part of the message that I would like to bring out today is that we have, a dependence on this product, and but at the same time, it is creating a lot of harm in the world. But to us, like I said, to our indigenous people, water is life. In the Dene language, Tu Bidha Sana, and in the Cree language, Nipi Bimatsuwin. So I just want to give a little bit of background about where I'm from. And if we could just start this. There's a picture of my mother and one of my cousins who live on the reserve. And I live on the reserve, Gregoire Lake Reserve at Sneer Lake in northern Alberta. And about 350 or so people living there. And then there are many that live off reserve as well in the nearby communities of Fort McMurray and also Edmonton, which is a big city further south of us. And this is at one of our round dances last winter. And clicking next. Oh, there we are. So when you come to our First Nation, the road where I live is just past our Petro-Canada. It's a gas station, and we recently, in the last few years, acquired our own gas station, which is built on our reserve lands, and it's actually been very helpful having our own gas station there. And on the top is the entrance to our reserve, where I live. We have like 3 parts of our reserve in northern Alberta, and that's just got a sign there just letting you know that you're coming onto our reserve. And the thing about our reserve is it's like many reserves in the north, like, or probably all of them. We don't have paved roads on our reserve, and we have like different types of infrastructure, that especially water and sewer, which has to be trucked. We have to use a truck to bring water in and to remove the sewage. So, and on the right, you'll see our band office, called the Fort McMurray First Nation Administration Building. And we'll go to the next. Okay. Before I start on this piece, I just wanted to say that, as I said, our First Nation has unpaved roads, so we have gravel roads, and like I said, we don't have the water that's piped in, but apparently this is being fixed, and that's going to happen probably sometime next year, where we're going to get the sewage and water lines coming to each home. And our homes are, we've had a big influx of people that decided to move back, and we've had mostly trailers being brought into our area. And so that's how people live. They're comfortable. You can get 4-bedroom trailers, and that's what I live in myself. But just the way the land is, there's lots of things that can be done. For instance, because we live so far up north, and because we're in the boreal forest, and there's lots of wetlands in the area, so it's very, I guess you could say, swampy in many areas around there. But also have to mention that it's like the biggest boreal forest in the world is in that region. It spreads across the rest of Canada in the north, and it's also circumpolar as well. So our land is basically a big carbon. It's a big carbon sink because the plants, the animal, or the land, and there are it's a lot of muskeg. We call it muskeg. It's not. We don't usually say swamp, but we use the word muskeg. And to us, the muskeg is very important. And it's something that we want to preserve, but we're finding out that that's really, it's something in danger right now because of climate change and other factors. We're finding that it is drying. Our land is not the way it was before, and we have longer dry spells. We have a lot of other, I guess, associated things to do with the climate change, and that's just one of the messages I want to bring across, that because of climate change, we see a lot of these things going on that we've never seen. And as we know, climate change is due to human people involved in making that happen around the world. So I was a part of the Mackenzie River Basin Board, and I'm bringing this up because this is the largest watershed I think in Canada, and it goes from you see there's on the left is British Columbia, then Alberta, and I'm in the Alberta part there in the northeast section, and the Athabasca River starts from where you see that's the mountains right there on the bottom left where the yellow starts. That's the Rocky Mountains, and that's actually where the Athabasca River starts in a glacier, and then it moves north, and that's part of the watershed that is linked to the larger Mackenzie River basin. And there are many other rivers that are also connected, but they all flow north, and it all flows out to the Arctic Ocean. So whatever we do downstream is going to have an effect upstream. And so this is just a reminder that that we are connected to everything. And like water, we're connected everywhere by water. And I mean, that used to be our way of transportation, before we had roads and these kinds of things. So so that goes up to the Arctic. And then here we go. Here we are in the province where I live in Canada. And this is where the oil sands are located. And we call it the tar sands because to us it's just like tar. It's made from bitumen, and bitumen is a very thick substance, and it's like syrup, and you can't just pour it like water or it doesn't flow. So you have to add things to it to make it flow. And so what you're seeing there in the green is the Athabasca River watershed. And so it goes all the way up north, like I said, and then it connects to the Mackenzie River Basin from other tributaries, and that's an area that I'm very concerned with, and also where I live. And as you know, Alberta is a very big place when you look at European countries. But it's, we don't have the populations, of course, but we have people living all over and have used this land and the waterways for millennia. And there we go. So as part of the work I do, I'm involved in different organizations, and one of them is called Aramat, and it started with a project called Tracking Change, which is was brought to us from the University of Alberta, and Professor Brenda Parley and her group came to the Mackenzie River Basin Board, and when I was sitting on that board, and asked us to be involved. I was part of the Traditional Knowledge and Strengthening Partnerships Steering Committee, which is made up of Indigenous people from 5 jurisdictions. And that would be from Alberta, from eastern British Columbia, northeastern Saskatchewan, the Yukon, the Northwest Territories. So we had people involved from all these different areas. And Tracking Change was about building and sharing knowledge about the sustainability of 3 of the world's largest freshwater ecosystems. And these 3 freshwater ecosystems are our Mackenzie River Basin, which we're part of through the Athabasca River watershed, the Mekong Delta in Thailand, and the Amazon Basin in Brazil and the other areas around it. So as part of this project, we looked at different things. And we looked at how traditional people have used the land, and how do we keep that knowledge intact. And this was one of the biggest things, that we do not want to lose this knowledge that we've had for thousands of years. And if the people are dying off without this knowledge being passed on and preserved and so on. And with the result of colonialism, we have seen many of our traditional knowledge has gone, and including our languages. And to me, that is a huge issue, because a lot of knowledge is embedded in the languages. So the fact of just going about preserving a language, learning a language, like we have to relearn or learn our own language. We know that English is not our mother tongue, so we have to preserve our own, so that we can at least understand some of these teachings that have been passed on. Me and my mother, who is 94, she speaks fluent Cree. So in our area, we have the Cree and we have the Dene people, who have a completely different language than ours. And we also have the Métis people. So Tracking Change has done a lot with organizations and communities, and supporting different projects that will, there's many things that can be done to preserve the cultural and the traditional knowledge that is there. And one I could mention off the top of my head is place names. And each area has its own traditional place name. And then when the colonizers came in, it was given a different name. And like our lake, for instance, in our language, it would have been called Willow Lake or Red Willow Lake. And it's called Gregor Lake from a person that lived there. So, I mean, there's many different, things like that we just didn't know if we're not being taught. So these kinds of things are really important to know. We had 12 indicators to find out, to document and to mobilize the local and traditional knowledge. And these are questions like, where are the fish? Can I eat the fish? Can I drink the water? How is the land changing? Is it safe to travel? How healthy are we? What about the youth? What are the climate impacts? What about the future? what about oil sands and mining? How does that affect us and affect the land, the water, and the animals? The hydro development, and what are the cumulative effects of all these things together? And when you have cumulative effects, you think about 1,000 death by 1,000 cuts. That's happening right now, because with all these small or medium and large oil companies developing or doing, the oil drilling and the producing and all that on our lands, this is going to have a huge impact on all of us. Plus, it already has a big impact on the animals and the water. And also, I just wanted to mention that I'm a co-chair of Keepers of the Water, which is concerned about health and the impacts of the oil industry and other types of development on the impacts on the water. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who the Keepers of the Water is, but I will get into that after we look at the other programs that are going on that I'm involved with that is actually they're global in scope. So here's the other group, Aramat. It's I'm one of their, I guess you could call me elder advisors, and that is to do with the health and well-being of people, and biodiversity around the world. And it's really an extension of what we were doing with tracking change. So I will just play this. It's just a little bit about myself on their website. I live here in the boreal forest, and I believe we have to look after our land, protect our land, and keep our water safe and clean for future generations. I have worked for many years as a water and land defender, and I am a co-founder of the Keepers of the Athabasca Watershed Society. We recently amalgamated with the Keepers of the Water, which started in 2006, and is very concerned about the Arctic drainage basin. As a keeper, I believe water is a sacred gift, not a commodity to be bought or sold. I believe we must work together to protect and conserve water in all of its forms today and for future generations. Also, I have been a part of the Tracking Change research projects led by Brenda Parley and her team at the University of Alberta since my time as a Mackenzie River Basin Board member and part of the Traditional Knowledge and Strengthening Partnership Steering Committee. This is to advance the collective knowledge of Indigenous people and preserve and protect the people who still hold that knowledge. I also am closely involved with the Treaty 8 Association of Alberta, and we work together as sovereign nations to assert our inherent and treaty rights. As a mother and grandmother, I believe our most precious resource is our children and the generations to come. Hi. Thank you. Okay, so for more information, of course, we do have a website on the Tracking Change and the Aramat projects. Now, the tar sands where we live, it's the biggest industrial project on the planet. I'm just going to get my notes here. So it is located in the Treaty 8 and the Treaty 6 territories, and it's home to the Dene, the Cree, the Nakota, and Métis. in the colonial name of Alberta, Canada. And it is the world's most destructive oil tar sands operation, and it is growing. The surface mining of Canada's bitumen is the biggest mining operation in the world. It contains a tarry bitumen mixed with sand. It's mined from underneath the boreal forest. This region has been known as the tar sands. The 175-odd oil sands mining projects are owned by major oil companies from around the world, including Exxon and China's CNOOC, C-N-O-O-C. Altogether, the companies pump out 2.6 million barrels every day, virtually all of which is shipped to United States refineries. Those barrels hold diluted bitumen, not crude oil. Bitumen is too thick to pump, so light crude oil and chemicals are added. It has a significant environmental footprint of approximately 895 square kilometers. Of this area, tailings ponds covered approximately 239.3 square kilometers. And that is one of the issues that we are working on as keepers of the water. The tailings ponds, for every barrel of bitumen that is shipped out, 6 to 12 barrels of tailing waste is produced, which is a lot. The new research shows that they surpassed 1.18 trillion liters. Their volume continues to grow. We can actually see some of these tailing ponds as we drive north, and they're located in the surface mining area. There's another type of drilling that goes on called SAGD, but it's underneath the ground and it's directional drilling. So scattered along the banks of the Athabasca River is one of the world's largest collections of tailings waste, able to fit 500,000 Olympic swimming pools. They're so toxic that the birds and animals have to have some sort of way of keeping them from falling or diving into it. So they're all fenced off, and there are water or cannons on the air cannons that make a really loud noise every so often to scare any potential birds that might fly down there. I think there are safer ways, for the animals, but it costs more money. So because oil companies are owned by shareholders, the bottom line is to make a profit, not to spend money. Tailings ponds have significant environmental impacts. Scientific reports have found that these leach chemicals that sicken local communities, poison wildlife, and pose the ever-growing threat of contaminating the region's water resources. Tar sands okay, so this is near the Athabasca River, some of the tailings ponds. This is some of the contamination we've seen. This looks at Fort McMurray, north of Fort McMurray, and just shows some of the impacts. The proposed dumping of the toxic tailings into the Athabasca River. Now, the Alberta government and the corporations operating in the tar sands area are now proposing to start dumping the toxic tailing ponds into the Athabasca River, and which flows into the Decho. Eventually, Decho is the indigenous name for the Mackenzie River, and then into the Arctic Ocean. They are claiming that the tailings ponds will be treated before release, but with keepers of the water, the treated tailings ponds will not be safe to be dumped into the river. The keepers of the water is raising the alarm bell and calling this one of the most potentially biggest environmental crimes on the planet and must be stopped. And this cannot happen without proper consultation with the Indigenous people. Keepers of the Water first came into existence in 2006 at a big gathering in Fort Simpson, which is in the Northwest Territories. And people were concerned about the increased turbidity and toxicity and decreased volume of water in their watershed. We've seen the water drop each year. And they wanted to know what was happening to the water and the ecosystems that relied on it. So meeting on the shores of the Great Decho, Mackenzie River, the elders got together and produced a declaration. Water is a sacred gift, an essential element that sustains and connects all life. It's not a commodity to be bought or sold. All people share an obligation to cooperate in ensuring that water, in all its forms, is protected and conserved with regard to the needs of all living things today and for the generations to come. Now, there is something called the indigenous rights, indigenous and inherent rights of the First Nations and people, Indigenous people of Canada. And we have survived many millennia before Canada was even a country. And we had our own laws and governments and governance structures and everything that goes along with having a culture and having a people that live together. And Canadian and Indigenous governments and Canadian laws never recognize these Indigenous rights, all of them, some of them. Instead, Canada prefers to recognize only a small subset of Indigenous rights while keeping Indigenous nations under the framework of settler law and governance for most aspects of life. And Canada wants to control the land to ensure profit from the extraction of minerals, fossil fuels, and other industries. And as you know, there are like a lot of royalties and taxes that come out of these industries, and it goes to the municipal and the provincial and the federal government, but not to the First Nations who have lived there and looked after the land all that time. So in around 2009, I believe, is when a group of us got together with the Keepers of the Water, or Keepers of the Athabasca at the time, and we hosted an event called the Healing Walk, and that was basically to look at how to look after our land, to heal, you know, what has been done to it, to heal ourselves as well. And we did a walk that went from like right around the area where you can see the tailings ponds, and there's sort of a roundabout where about 13 kilometers long, and we walked there, and people from many areas came there every year, and we did this for 5 years in a row. And we had these signs: stop the destruction, start the healing. And in the background you could see the Syncrude plant, which is just off right beside the highway. Also Suncor, which is another huge oil company, was also nearby. And how important that we need to be connected to the land that came out, and the prayers. And as Indigenous people, we really believe in prayers, and we usually say prayers before any gathering. So I said my own prayer, but this is something that we recognize, and it's the spiritual beliefs, and I think that's kept us that helped us survive over all the damage and the trauma of being colonized and losing our lands and many other things. So we must come together to work to protect the planet by respecting our culture, languages, and most important, for land to be returned to Indigenous people. So we had hundreds of people that would come on this healing walk. When it finished in 2015, oh no, I think it was 2014, we decided to, instead of not having anything, we decided to have something else, and it's called the Healing Gathering. And it's located in our community. We have a beach beside the lake, and it had a big space, and that we could bring people together, and usually people would come and camp out for 4 days. And we would have various cultural activities going on where people could share and learn from one another. And we did all sorts of things like tanning hides, moose hides, going fishing, drying meat, in a traditional way, right? And sharing food, sharing culture, dances, drumming, and these kinds of things. And to us, that's healing, to bring back our culture. It makes, it's a healing thing to be able to do that. And it also strengthens us as well, because we don't want these activities or these cultural knowledge practices to be forgotten. And in order to keep them alive, we have to keep doing it. Like we have to go and pick our berries every year, and we have to go hunting. And even if there's not much there left to hunt, we still have to know how to do it, and what's associated with it. Because fishing, for instance, all of these things, like how did people preserve fish back in the days when there wasn't a fridge or a freezer to put them in, So we had to, some of us had to relearn it, and some of us had to be taught it because it was never taught. So it is starting to be done in the schools. They are having land-based learning camps, and we do, there are culture camps going on in just about every community in the north. So this is something that Keepers contributes to and promotes. And that's something that we want to see on an ongoing basis. And it's very important to us. Now, Ai Masicho, there's more further information for people that want to look more into it. And next. I talked about Treaty 8 as being our treaty, because we live in the Treaty area. And remember, I showed you the picture of the Alberta map with the Athabasca River watershed? Well, that is actually the border of the Treaty 8 and Treaty 6 is the Athabasca River. And Treaty 8 is actually the top, like the half of Alberta, and it extends into the neighboring province of British Columbia, and on the other side to the neighboring province of Saskatchewan, and also a small portion of the Northwest Territories. And these are the things that we had when we signed a treaty with the Queen of England in 1899. Treaty rights, what are they? I wonder if we could. Oh, I don't have the picture. Okay. These are the promises that we have doctors, that rations are provided, that the right to barter is always there, that we have access to hospitals and medicine, that Indians, they were called Indians, retain minerals. And that's under the depth of a plow. That's supposed to belong to us. Gardening tools and seeds. We were promised farm and haying equipment, subsurface rights retained. The land acquired by the Queen was only for surface rights. The legal, we were also promised legal representation. We were promised hunting, trapping, fishing, and gathering rights to be retained. In case of hunger, all gates shall be opened. We were promised policing. Can't see that. Tents. Oh, canvas. Yeah. Canvas for tents. Bullets to be supplied. School and education. And that we'd be exempt from taxation. The cattle and horses provided, and we'd be exempt from her participation in taxes. No Indian shall hang by rope was another promise. Land purchased for farming did not include forests. So these were promised as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the waters flow. This treaty from 1899 is still in effect, and we are holding the government to it. Now, maybe this is slow. Oh, there it is. Wait, let me go back. Recently, I went to a trade show that was hosted by our First Nation. And this just goes to show the relationship that we have with oil companies. There's the Husky Tower in Calgary, and that's kind of a landmark in Calgary, and it just shows you that oil is such like a part of the last 60 years, and in Alberta, and I mean, if you look at our Edmonton hockey team, the Oilers, right, and then we have the oil barons up in Fort McMurray, and so on, right? So we see that it's just a facet of that culture, and we have to live with the oil companies. I mean, they're there, but we get a tiny pittance of what the oil companies get, less than 1%, much less than 1%. And over here at this hosting of this event, we see two of our counselors in the middle, and on the left is our CEO of our company for the Fort McMurray First Nation group of companies, and he's out there finding funds, and how to get I guess jobs, contracts, and so on of these different companies that are working on our lands. So we just feel that is something that is owed to us, and that we need the compensation. That and even though it is a pittance, and we should be getting much more, we're actually working on that as well. And at this conference, I just had did a little walkthrough, and slow. And this is, what is this? Can you play the video? It's just a look at some of the different groups that had booths there. Maybe go to the next one. And this is our ice sculpture, Fort McMurray First Nation. And it's just a kind of, I don't know if any of you have been in Calgary, but it's all oil companies. That's where they are mostly based. And oh, okay. And I think we've come to the end of the slideshow anyway. And I just wanted to finish with this painting that was done by my sister, who's an artist, and just to remind us that we are part of the land, and this bear represents the people, and the forest, and well, as well as water. So that's the kind of things that I wanted to leave you with. How important the land, the animals, the plants, our medicines, our language, culture is important to us. And it's not just important to us, it's important to the world, because we should not lose this valuable knowledge that we've always had. So I think I can leave you with that. Yeah, I mean, we have other things to talk about, and we do have some hope for the future. But it's a lot of work. So, thank you.
Thank you, Cleo. So we come to our next point, the panel discussion. So you can stay here, yeah? You're part of the panel
we all-
discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would like to say a little bit about Alejandra Rodriguez. Alejandra works as a teaching fellow and visual culture, as a teaching fellow in film and visual culture at the University of Aberdeen, and is a member of the Reflecting Oil team. She gained experience in holistic methodological approaches on several major educational research projects at the University of Concepción in Chile from 1998 until 2002. Alejandra was awarded a PhD by Grace School of Art in Aberdeen in 2007. She first collaborated with me in 2008. Together, also, I would like to mention Monica Viocol. She invited me for the Invisible Oil exhibition in Aberdeen, where I met Alejandra. She wrote an essay about my work. She also has contributed to the Reflecting Oil as a proposal writer and researcher since 2017. So yeah, okay, I have to join.
Yeah, just to give the introduction, Jacob, could we have the first slide, please? Great. No, that's the second. There we are. So this is just a brief introduction. Good evening, everyone gathered here at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. And good evening to those of you who are following us online. I believe this event is being live streamed. I should probably begin by reminding our audience here to put our mobile phones in mute. Thank you. So I'm delighted, really, really delighted to be here with you for this opening of Reflecting Oil Colloquium, an exciting event. We have been looking forward to an event originally scheduled for 2021, postponed because of COVID restrictions, which made the experience of meeting in person very difficult. This face-to-face experience is key to the Reflecting Oil Colloquium, as some of our participants will be manipulating the substance of crude oil directly. The lovely images of our panelists in the background give us some insight into the collective effort behind the preparatory stages. Many of them I met on Zoom until today, except for Ernst and Holger Ott, whom I met in late 2019, just before COVID struck, at Leuven's University's Petroleum Engineering Laboratories, as we conducted our first series of experiments with the wonderful support of Karis Abdul Hamid and Pete Arnold, both studying at Leuven, and Monica Vikukel, and also an invaluable member of Reflecting Oil's research team. So before introducing our panelists one by one, let me say a few words about how this panel is organized and its intention. Our panelists today will be engaging in a conversation from multiple perspectives about the substance of oil, how oil connects to culture, economics, politics, how oil connects with every aspect of our lives. And through this conversation, we will not only get to know more about the Reflecting Oil project, but also get a flavor of what an interdisciplinary reflection on energy transition involves. A key premise sustaining Reflecting Oil is that a future beyond oil can only be imagined after we understand oil and how it shapes who we are. Imagination will play an important role in today's discussion, in which our panelists will be commenting on how artistic methodologies may offer us fresh insights into the substance, which can potentially change our perception of the substance. At 8:30, we will open the floor for questions, which you, our lovely audience, can formulate to the panel as a whole, or to any specific panelist. There will be 10 minutes or so for this Q&A, after which we will be wrapping up the discussion. So I hope my panelists are still awake, and let me introduce and welcome them. So I will begin with Jordan Kinder. Jordan is an environmental humanities and media studies scholar from northern British Columbia and a citizen of the Métis Nation of Alberta. Since 2020, Jordan has been a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Art History and Communication Studies at McGill University. He studies the cultural politics of energy, media, infrastructure, and environment. Jordan, tonight, will be contributing to the discussion from a petroculture's perspective, particularly from his knowledge of the ways in which the meaning of Canadian oil and its infrastructures are expressed across the contemporary mediascape. Our second panelist, Holger, third actually, chair of reservoir engineering in the Department of Petroleum Engineering at the University of Leuven, which is Reflecting Oil's national cooperation partner. Holger has been a visiting reader at the Department of Earth Science and Engineering at Imperial College London and at Aachen University since 2011. He has experience of working in both academia and the industry. His research focuses on geological aspects of sustainable energy technology development. This evening, Holger will be contributing to our conversation from a scientific perspective. Cleo, our keynote speaker, thank you so much for your wonderful keynote speech, Cleo. Very inspiring. For those who missed her thought-provoking speech, I was sitting at the front, so I don't know if somebody missed it. Cleo is an activist from northern Alberta, which is right in the heart of the tar sands, working with environmental groups since 2008. Tonight, Cleo will be contributing to the discussion with her environmental and activist perspective. Kat Válastur, the choreographer of the invigorating oil performance we have just seen in collaboration with Thomas Grill and Ernst Logar. Kat describes her choreographic works as defined by the creation of transformative experiences on stage. In her work, bodies manifest the ways that power structures are experienced, embodied, and resisted. Kat will be contributing to our conversation through her perspective as an artist. Last but not least, Reflecting Oil's principal investigator, Ernst Logar. For those of you who missed his opening speech, Ernst began his research on oil back in 2008. And he has also researched the tar sands of northern Alberta, gaining first-hand experience of the impacts of tar sand extraction. And Ernst will be contributing to our conversation through his perspective as an artist. So shall we begin our conversation then? Yes, I thought in order to engage the audience and get a sense of what has inspired you, this is a question which I'm going to formulate to each of you. Why did you become interested in the substance? So shall we begin with you, Jordan?
Yeah, so I've kind of two paths in which I became interested in the substance. The first, I guess, is personal, which is when I was a teenager working at a gas station that my dad managed as I was growing up. And then later, as an academic, becoming sort of intellectually interested in Canadian oil in particular, vis-a-vis an interest in greenwashing and kind of promotional tactics around the appropriation of kind of environmentalism for corporate ends. I was recommended to read a book by Ezra Levant, who's kind of a sort of conservative commentator in Canada, who wrote a book called Ethical Oil that was essentially sort of taking to task all the critiques of Canadian oil that had existed, some of which we've encountered tonight so far, and sort of pivoted those to suggest that actually, because of sort of Canada's sort of global environmental leadership, stringent environmental regulations, and so on and so forth, that the oil being produced in the tar sands is actually ethical and sort of a progressive, positive force. And so to me, this was kind of almost like the peak of greenwashing. And so at a certain sort of point, these two paths intermingled, and so sort of my sort of intimate experience with kind of petroculture as it exists at a gas station, which is kind of one of the sort of primary infrastructural sites of how we engage and encounter oil, with also then this kind of question of ecological politics. Yeah.
Thanks so much, George. Could you pass on the microphone and now Cleo, why did you become interested in something? Probably you already answered that in your speech, but if you can summarize that in a couple of minutes.
Well, I wasn't really interested in oil. When I first moved back to my home community, I had left when I was a child. So I hadn't been there for like many years, 50 years or so. And then came back there and found that, the whole economy, everything was based on oil. And then when I heard about the first thing that happened when I moved back, 2006, there was something on the news about people having to go to the hospital because there was an ammonia leak from one of the oil sands operations nearby. And the community of Fort McKay, which is an Indigenous community, had to send children to the hospital. And that just, it really struck me that, you know, this industry can also, like, can be really dangerous. And so I just learned more and more, and went to these meetings, and went to the Water is Life gathering, the one after the one in the Decho, which was at Fort Simpson. But the year later, there was a meeting in Fort Smith, which is north of us in Fort McMurray. And at that meeting, Justin Trudeau was a visiting speaker. So that would have been around 2007. And he was quite young and seemed like, you know, like he had all these idealistic kind of words to say. And so we got to, you know, talk to him, listen to him. He actually came up there a couple of times. And the other time that he came was sitting in our band office, you know, where our First Nation is. And he was sitting there, and I managed to get a question to him. And I think I asked him something about, well, what is, you know, how are we going to live with all this, with the oil industry, and we're trying to protect our land. And he actually did not have anything to, he didn't really have an answer at the time. Or I didn't remember him having an answer to whatever he said. So, so yeah, that was kind of interesting, and seeing how things were like the greenwashing that was done, and it's still being done. And you know that right now oil prices are so high that oil producers in our province are really happy about that and making a lot of money, but it's not spilling over to communities that actually really need it. So another thing, though, that was interesting to me is that I had heard that because bitumen, it just comes out of the grounds in different places, right? In the north, where I'm from. And I was told that that stuff that comes out, that really thick tarry stuff, was good for patching canoes. And our people used to get around by canoes. And so that was like a little bit of history that just stuck with me and made me interested. And yeah, canoes were our mode of transportation at one time, not so much anymore. And birch bark canoes is like like becoming a lost art, but it's starting to come back with people learning about it. So I just wanted to add that as to my interest in oil.
Yeah, so obviously, as as the head of a petroleum engineering department, I'm coming from the other side. But I also don't have a petroleum background. Originally, I'm a physicist, and I came the first time in contact with oil at a fuel station, of course, no, but with the topic of oil, and I got interested in at the beginning of my first assignment in the oil industry. So why did I join the oil industry? So I got the opportunity to work on carbon sequestration, right? So the other thing, the product that comes out if we combust the fuel, right? And this, I did not make a lot of friends with this move. But I think this was a good move because it gave me a lot of satisfaction, let's say. I think I worked on the right side. Of course, there was always the greenwashing argument, of course, and I see this partly. I do not see this for myself in the moment, and also not for the activities that we have done. So basically, I was at the beginning interested in carbon sequestration, but then at a certain point, I understood that carbon footprint of fossil fuels starts with the production of the fossil fuel, right? For example, tar sands are extremely energy consuming to be produced. Yeah, you can directly calculate a carbon footprint out of that, which is much higher than for other fuels, for example, right? And this was the time I digged into oil and gas, in the topic of oil and gas. And I got interested in, let's say from a scientific point of view, it's a very interesting substance, a very complex substance, especially in contact with other substances, and this is part of the Reflecting Oil project. But also, of course, and this is the result of this project that we are working together on, it is one of the most interesting fluids because it has a cultural component, it has a political component. There is no other substance that is more political than oil or hydrocarbons in general, as we see in the moment, right, with the current crisis. And in all this, of course, as sad as it is from the environmental impact, on the other hand, to work on it gives me a lot of satisfaction, as I mentioned, and this has to do with the fact that we have a huge lever at a petroleum engineering department. What does this mean? So we work directly on the problem, right? You can work on one hand on renewable energy, but to be honest, from the technology point of view, this is developed, right? So what is the problem? The problem is basically that we cannot manage it in time, right? And this is also, of course, this is a problem of our society. This is a problem of the available materials. This is a problem of the education of the people. We don't have enough people for that, so to say, to get it in time and so on. So this means this leaves a very, very, very big problem on the other side of the hydrocarbons. And this is actually where we are working on. So basically it is a oil and myself, this is maybe something like a hate-love. Yeah. So on one hand, it's very interesting, right, to work with, and it's meaningful. On the other hand, of course, we see the problems. And to be honest, if people ask me, and today I got as well 2 or 3 questions in this direction. So why in hell are you working in petroleum engineering? Has this a future? Yes, it has, because we are working on one of the biggest problems that we have, so to say.
Yes. I am not actually working only with oil. Basically, what also Alejandra said, I'm working mostly about how power structures are embodied. So also, I see it very much from a feminist perspective as well in all of my works. Let's say the encounter I had with oil the first time was in 2015. I was in Baku. I was working on a project that I didn't have to do anything with oil, but I happened to experience, beside the project I was doing, also the life of the place there, and also the people. So I kind of like started to experience a very uncanniness in relation to how the whole the infrastructure of the city. So it was like somehow a city that was made especially for the oil companies, and outside there was a lot of poverty, and I decided to somehow go to the fields and see how this was all, what was happening a bit outside of this kind of like special economical box, to see also like that somehow there were like almost like people living very close to this to petroleum. So when I came back, I started to work on oil and somehow see it from a very physical perspective, as if like making a speculative situation, because I work a lot with speculation, like what if. So I kind of like created a choreography in which I kind of speculated that the blood was somehow the blood that circulates in our body is somehow changed into oil. So therefore, I created a certain kind of kinetic body of language that it carried the speculation. And also in this particular performance that I call Spinning Melancholy, it's also very much related to give this oil ring to a very young girl, somehow to reflect on how our bodies are all dependent on oil, but at the same time, there is also the feeling that the ring is turning by itself. So there is this dependency and independency between the girl and the ring, and that is why it's very important the fact that she stops it. So the whole performance, the weight of the performance is very much on this stop. Yeah.
So for me, I already mentioned it. I was invited by the curator Monica Viocol to Aberdeen for residency at Peacock Visual Arts. And at that moment, I wasn't really aware about oil and the importance. And there, it really changed my mind, because I really experienced that this substance is such for our in our modernity is so relevant. So our food production is based on it, our mobility, sure, and the material world, the medicine. So a very wide field, and so I got really interested in the substance and in the topic oil. I did a work. The title was Non-Public Spaces. So I came with this project to Aberdeen because this project is about. In this project, I tried to get access to places which are not accessible for the citizens. So I started here in Vienna to take photos of a vault at the National Bank, or for example, an internet node, so where all the providers are, a space where all the providers have their servers. So we're somehow spaces of like, which has a certain social, cultural, or political, or economical meaning. And so I came to Aberdeen, and and so the approach was to do this in the context of the North Sea oil industry. But then this was quite naive to think that I will get any permission to get access to oil terminal or conference rooms or other facilities. And so I put my focus on the substance. So I started to, I found a refinery in Dundee, south of Aberdeen. They provided me with crude oil. So I got crude oil from Venezuela. So because they no oil company in Aberdeen, they provided oil. So, and then I started to work with the substance. So I started to do printing. I worked with bitumen. yeah, I developed conceptual works like photography. So this was the process to, I visit a lot of companies and I did research on site, and yeah, I think it was in 2008 where the oil price was also very high. I remember it was about 150 US dollar per barrel. So this was my approach to the substance, and this confrontation with the substance somehow changed my thinking about the abstract notion of oil. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that, Ernst. Well, I formulated this icebreaker question just for our audience to get a more subjective or personal dimension of our panelists. And it's so interesting to see that all of you, in a way, are fascinated by the substance. And I'd also like to thank you very much, Cleo, for your informative lecture. And so after I formulated this icebreaker question, I'm going to ask our panelists a more specific question. And I've never been to Canada, Cleo. Has anyone in the audience been to Canada? Yes. Have you been to Alberta? Are you? I found this extremely informative. So thanks a lot for that. And so I'm really pleased to have two people from Canada, Jordan and Cleo. So what I wanted to ask you, Jordan, is how do you respond to Cleo's? Well, you've already responded in a way, but are there any specific issues that you would like to sort of emphasize or go into extra depth for our audience to make the most of this great presentation, speech?
Yeah, I guess I have two comments. So one is kind of just a side point and sort of additional information on the tailings ponds that I think is pretty pertinent, which is that they were first made as a temporary solution until it was a process was developed to treat them properly and then return them to the Athabasca River, which is actually where the water is taken from that's used in the processing in the first place. So it was imagined that there'd be this kind of circular economy operating where the water would be diverted, used in the production process, treated, and then returned back. But what happened actually after the first kind of commercial oil sands project ramped up in the late 1960s was that they never could actually figure out a process to treat the water. They were using processes that were originally used for treatment in copper tailings for copper mines, and that didn't work due to the makeup of the findings that came out of this process. And so in the early 70s, scientists that were researching this said, we don't have a solution to this. And so since then, they just carried on with production and never actually found a solution. And as far as I know, there isn't actually a solution yet, despite now trying to propose back the thing that they were supposed to have sorted out before this project even went underway. And so a side point, I'm really cynical about the possibilities of this ever happening. I went to university in the University of Northern British Columbia, where I did my bachelor's and master's, and I knew people that were working on engineering projects related to the treatment of these tailings. And a story that I got was a student, I think he was working on his MSc, went to pick up tailings that had been treated to the max capacity of their abilities at the time, so that he could do further research and try to refine this process. So he drove up to the place that he was getting it from in his car, in his regular sedan, and they wouldn't give him the water because it was so toxic. It was actually like a regulated substance that needed to be delivered and picked up in a proper safe storage vehicle. And so that shows the actual kind of limit of treatment at this point. And that was probably only 13 years ago.
Thanks a lot for that, Jordan. As I said, I've never been to Alberta, and I find it very difficult to imagine this sort of landscape. And so I'm just thinking in terms of, you know, the visual side of things. So when we think of the art, we think of, you know, different ways to represent our environment. How will we respond to it? And so I'm really intrigued, really intrigued. I would like to ask you, Cleo, how do you respond to Kat's choreography, which is an attempt to sort of visualize, an attempt to convey maybe some abstract, try to materialize some sort of understanding and take on things. And I know you also have an artistic side. Your sister is a painter. You said your daughter is a filmmaker. You're also a filmmaker. So I would like to hear your thoughts about this artistic methodology to try to engage with this terrible landscape that you have presented. So if you could comment on your take on these artistic methodologies and probably give us some reflections about Kat's performance.
Well, first, I just want to say that I thought it was a beautiful, very moving performance. I think that any conceptual treatment of this topic that we're discussing is good for us to look at it in a different way. I just wanted to also say in reference to Jordan's comment about them not knowing, about the engineers or so on, not really knowing what to do about you know, the tailings ponds, for instance, and how to store it and do that kind of thing. Well, to give you an example, not far from where I live in northern Alberta, there's an Enbridge tank farm, and where the oil is stored before it goes in a pipeline to its other destinations. And one year there was a spill, and nobody knew about it for probably maybe a week or so, and it drained into a nearby fen, and it did a lot of damage. And I mean, like you can't really get oil out of a fen, you know, or a muskeg. And so what do? You know, you do whatever you can to mitigate that kind of thing. I mean, not it's up to the oil companies to do that, but it shows though that the technology, you know, like I think it wasn't well thought out, because that oil spill that happened, that those pipelines burst or ruptured because they didn't realize that the shifting of the muskeg, the water underneath, causing a lot of shift in, then there's, you know, freezing and thawing. It's very cold. It gets to 40 you know, degrees below centigrade or more in the winter. And it just the changes in the climate, it caused it to move and then to break apart. And so, you know, some of the technology is still unknown, is how do you deal with these things. Now they know about that, but there's other things, and there's old oil pipelines that they're using, you know, that also could cause anything could happen. Now, as far as the part about the artistic way way of looking at things, and Well, I just look around our country and I see the beauty in it. And to me, it's beautiful with all the trees and all the plants that we're learning about and getting to know again. To me, are really important. And I see people are starting to get back into, you know, gathering medicines and picking and things like that, and even farming. You know, like we're starting to grow things, and to me, that's just another. It's another creative. It's a creative thing, you know, to be able to go out there and plant and see it grow, and then, you know, getting the produce and everything. And that's how I look at any type of art form is, you know, you nurture it, and you know, it gets better the more you look after it and the more you practice and things like that. And I myself have not made any you know, like video kind of work for many years, but my daughter does, and I still haven't you know, left it behind. It's something that I still, you know, want to work. I just found myself so involved in all these other things that it's kind of almost a big turnaround from what I used to do. So, but that love of the art and the you know, and the creative aspect of just being in that country, and you know, working on our doing what we believe in as spiritual people. You know, we really connect to the land, and we have a lot of ceremonies, and we pray before we do things, and
How
you
lovely.
know, all that happens. So,
Thanks a lot.
yeah.
And let me connect to Ernst, because Ernst, you spent some time in Alberta, and you through your artistic project try to respond to this landscape, which has been so nicely described by both Jordan and Cleo. So if you could tell us a little bit about your experience there in Alberta, how you saw it. Was it the first time, the only time you've been to Alberta when you did that project?
No, I went there, I think, 3 times.
Okay.
Yes, and yeah, man, sure, this kind of industry is, I would say, the worst thing how you can extract oil. Yeah, this is, I would say. So it's it's a very, for me, it's a very uncanny place because there are these tailing ponds, and there are these how to say, Vogelscheuchen, you know, these sound cannons. So it's, yeah, it looks, man, you see, when you, there are some, when you go drive the highway, it looks like a desert, yeah. And yeah, this was a picture I still remember. So yeah, man, and now what I did, I tried to approach it. So we did a canoe trip, passing through the oil sand area, like the Suncor upgrader, like yeah. So this was, yeah, for me yeah, quite a strong
yes.
experience.
And
Yeah, but yeah, I tried to understand also this Fort McMurray as a city which is yeah, it's the base of the oil industry. Yeah, it. So I really, man, it was very interesting for me to do research there, and I did some video work. So we visited together with Cleo one of the tailing ponds. Yeah, so this was compared to Aberdeen another experience. Yeah.
Yes, because you are interested, your artistic practice is really focused on the substance, the materiality of oil. So what did you learn during that specific experience in Alberta? What sort of new understandings of the substance? Because I know this is, you've been building up quite a lot of knowledge throughout the years, trying to manipulate this substance. You smell it, you touch it. Have you tasted it yet, or is that in your list?
What I did
Tonight.
tried
You will be tasting it tonight.
what I tried to do is to extract oil or bitumen from the tar sand. So I tried to extract it, and it was interesting that the first photograph by Niepce in 1826 was based on a asphaltum plate.
Yeah,
So the first picture which was made with oil. Yeah. So and I was interested in that. So what I remember then I did some research. Here in Vienna we have a school for photography, a very old one, the Grafische Lehranstalt, and they have an old collection with old photographs. And also, so I got the recipe to do this from there, and I tried to extract the bitumen out of the tar sands, but I didn't manage. Man, there is another artist, Warren Carrier. He did this also. My approach was to expose it directly with the camera on, so to build my own film out of the tar sands, and so this was an approach there. Man, it's a different state, it's not liquid. It's it's a stone. So it wasn't. So this I tried to.
Thanks for that, Ernst. So discussing artistic treatments of the substance, I would like to ask you, Kat, to tell the audience a little bit about your choreography. I know you did Oilinity, that Ernst was blown away by. So I wanted to ask you, is this choreography based on Oilinity, and tell the audience a little bit more about what you had in mind when you put this piece together.
Yeah. First of all, it's very interesting because I hear the word beautiful, and for me, it's not beautiful at all. I mean, I didn't do it with the purpose of making a beautiful performance, more an alerting performance, I think, because the girl, the fact that she's having a ring that is filled with oil and she's like very lightly playing with it, and she's only 14, it's an alerting performance and not a beautiful performance. But I understand the beauty in terms of like that for sure. When you see a girl that she's so beautiful, the first thing that comes to your mind is like how beautiful she is when she does it. But the layer underneath is the horror that exists, and that is why we're talking about power structures and how they are embodied. So I could just read a little bit, maybe because it's just like a little bit to not make something out of my mind that it's not there, because I think when I write a text, it's very important for me to follow the performance. So I would basically read a little bit. What is this? So the the performance is called Spinning Melancholy, and I say Spinning Melancholy because this exists already in Olinity. In Olinity, there is a choreography, which means that the bodies are translating, let's say, a condition of how it would be if our bodies were circulating oil instead of blood, and therefore inside the space there is somehow a game that is set, and this game is produced by 3 different sculpture objects. One of that is called Spinning Melancholy because it kind of like reflects the economical system and the circulation of oil in relation to economy, of course. So that is why the fact that I call it Spinning Melancholy again is again about circulating oil, therefore economy. So in a way, what we experience, I say, we see a young athlete of gymnastics, and we experience her together with the ring. We can speculate that the ring could rotate by its own autonomous action or by the athlete's body. We can feel the dependency of the 2 elements, the oil ring and the young athlete. The way of relation reflects the degrees with which the world is somehow dependent on oil. As the girl's body becomes the material that makes the ring perform its continuous and vicious circularity, the gluey substance in the plastic ring that contains it slips on her body like a liquid element on a fine surface. At one point in the performance, the girl stops the spinning. This gesture transforms the trajectory of the condition and creates a new situation. The gesture of stopping the ring from turning defines the purpose of the performance and opens up a new speculative space in relation to our resources and our future. I'm saying this because the situation that is happening now because of oil, because we know that there is also this thing with Ukraine and the, let's say, the danger or the fact that the oil can be stopped and not be provided in Europe, because there was this kind of issue. The political problem is that there are other ways of bringing oil instead of thinking of alternative solutions. And that is why I leave it open, because then it's a question. What if the oil stops? Then how do we think about the possibilities that they can open up and all the questions that open up?
Thanks a lot for that, Kat, because this speculative side is being developed in the Colloquium thanks to workshop 3. Yes,
that's why I didn't choreograph. It's like she's a girl coming from gymnastics. Therefore, I just conceptualized the speculative condition of power structure.
Yes. So, yes, Ernst, go ahead, because...
Yeah, I would like to say something about Kat's performance.
Yes, please.
I think, yeah, I remember when I saw the Olinity work, so I really important the body in relation to oil, because so that I was really I remember that these movements on the stage, so, and the relation also you were playing with the with was like liquid movements as well. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, because we all experience how this energy source determines also our movement, and I think that's very important to work with this media. Me, I work with fine arts, so with images, with sound, but I don't do performance. Yeah.
Yes. So now, Holger, we've been bombarding you here with artistic approaches. So, yes, Holger. So, I know the audience is really curious to know about your experience of participating in artistic experiments which have involved hands-on manipulation of the substance of crude oil. So tell us about it and be honest.
So I think I'm the alien here, right? So basically, maybe I start with the performance that we saw today. So beautiful, it would also be maybe the wrong word for me, but what I saw, yeah, so and I did not know your interpretation, and it's very interesting. So my interpretation, and I'm the outsider, right? I'm the technician, right? So is basically what I saw is mechanic movements. So that's one thing. I think maybe we may agree on that. Complex movements. In my case, in my understanding, it's complex movement as a human cannot perform it, right? So at least a normal human like me. Of course, it's obviously possible, but I would say it's difficult. And this kind of movements you may be able to perform with artificial machines, yeah, that are driven by fossil fuels, for example. Okay, if we are at that substance, right? On the other hand, not beautiful, but very aesthetic. So this tells me basically, and it's not terrifying, maybe in the final consequence it's terrifying, but not in the first consequence. We can do with it very nice things, and we do every day very nice things, right? And we can do things we could not do without an energy carrier that has that energy density, so to say, right? We could do much less. And this must be clear to us, I think, right? That this is a privilege somehow, and we abuse this privilege somehow. So this is maybe my interpretation, right? Maybe it overlaps with you to a certain extent, maybe not, I'm not sure, yeah.
That is why I think like the text is important, because then you can be in a dialogue with something. Otherwise, it's very open, and people, I mean, you can get lost in something. But I also like to hear different approach.
Okay, thank you. You asked me about the experiments, so to say, that we performed. Yeah, so this was basically, actually, we started with standard laboratory experiments for characterizing oil. And so from my perspective, this was, of course, for me, not too surprising, not too interesting at the very beginning, because I knew what came out. Yeah, so the difference was, okay, let's say a different situation. You teach a student, and you have a couple of artists in your laboratory, is basically that the student is doing what you say, the artist's not, right? So they deviated in all kind of directions, and it was very interesting to understand or to listen to their discussions, and also to the discussions with me, so to say, right? This was the interesting part of the initial phase. So it was not the oil itself, so I know how oil behaves, right? But it was the discussions around and let's say sorting the problem somewhere in. Yeah, and analyzing the problem in a different fashion. So where it became very exciting to me, it was the point where Ernst and the team started to mix crude oil with substances of our daily life, like honey, milk, and it's good that he did not tell me before, but finally as well with human blood. Yeah, so this was for me, of course, let's say I'm quite simple in my interpretations, but of course, land of milk and honey flow, right? Yeah. So at least in German we say it like that. Don't know whether in English as well, right? So it's metaphor for our luxury, whatever, paired with oil. And as well, blood and oil is also a very simple association somehow, but a very strong one. Yeah. So from the visual point of view, very interesting patterns occurred, so to say, right? So I understand a lot from instabilities, for example, of oil and water, and similar things happened, but much more manifold. Yeah, and this was from a visual point of view, and I'm rather a visual person. It was very exciting. I did not taste it, So, and I would have prevented Ernst from tasting it, at least in my laboratory, right? So, but the smell, let's say, it is not that I have an emotional feeling by smelling oil, not at all. Yeah, so it was interesting. Yeah, it was a different type of sense, but maybe I am too much of that on the technology side to maybe too much of a visual person for that.
Thanks a
But
lot.
altogether, of course, it was a let's say a very, very, very interesting experience, and for me especially valuable is how the discussions around, right, the interpretations of this kind of things, which really puts a light from another side, from a cultural side, as well as Clio today, right? So I know it from the technical side, so I know the problems in let's say, to a certain extent, maybe to a small extent, that you have in Alberta, but you came from a very essential side, yes, essential side, which means life, food, water, culture, yeah, disappearing of culture, and this, of course, this gives me a completely different feeling, right? So this goes then more into than reading the facts. Yeah, so that's a different perspective, and thanks for that.
Thank you so much. Well, we promised the audience to pose questions to either the panel as a whole, or you can address a panelist in particular. So somebody was going to be running around with the microphone. Paula. So what I would like you to do, this is the way we're going to play it. I would like you to raise your hand. Anyone has got a question? So the gentleman here, Paula, has got a question. So I will ask you please to stand up, and say, tell us your name and be very succinct. I mean, your question to the point. Yes.
I should say I'm working at the medical university, and I have a question to Cleoris.
And your name is, sorry?
Sorry?
What's your name?
In the medical university, I'm chemist actually, and I have a question to Cleoris. And when I heard her talk, I was thinking of a box with a balloon and a porcupine, a Stachelschwein, in the same box, and it is. I see the big conflict. There's the oil companies that want to exploit the whole countryside and take out as much as they want, and the keepers of the water that want to preserve everything. And it seems to me that it's really difficult to find a compromise. And what could be an idea how to get some compromise with this? I had a feeling that this is really difficult.
Thanks a lot for that question. Cleo, do you want to take this?
So by compromise, are you talking about compromising with the oil companies? Yeah. Mhm. Well, I think that's already has been done. There's a lot of there's relationships that have been building for some time, and what happens is that First Nations and Indigenous communities, you know, wherever they are in connection with any development, they right now they have to get an agreement from that community, wherever it is in whose territory they're going to be doing this work in, and getting oil out or bitumen out, and it has to go to a consultation. It has to go through a process, and each First Nation has, and probably the Métis communities as well, has an office. Like it serves the purpose of consultation, and what they do is they work with that community and they determine what kind of benefits will come out of that relationship. And I mentioned earlier that that the benefits, they are coming in. It's a very small amount, and it's not quite the same as if they were getting royalties, say, which the governments get, the other governments, because each First Nation has a governing structure and and a leader and leadership. And the people living in these in our communities, they see oil as something that the oil industry is something that's there. It's established itself very well. You can't they can't just disappear overnight because they've got like 40 or 50 years of drilling or producing or whatever it is, and some of them are just starting out. And so the thing is, they have to sit down with the First Nation. If the First Nation has some disagreement or something that they if they don't agree, then that oil company can't proceed until they come to some sort of an agreement. And it's not always in the best, it's not always the best agreement that you could find. Um, but but they do have to consider, that a certain amount is going to go to that First Nation or Indigenous community, to for various things, and which I think is only fair. And it's I believe that there should be royalties attached. That's what I believe, that those royalties should be going to First Nations, not just the municipal and the provincial and the federal governments. So that is a question that is actually being discussed at the treaty level, the Treaty 8 level. There are 40 different First Nations that belong to Treaty 8, and that's like the half of Alberta, basically, in the northern half, and parts of the other provinces as well. And so they are really looking at that, and they're looking at it from a sovereign perspective, because they do not answer to the federal government or the provincial government. When they signed treaties, it was signed with the Crown of England, not with Canada. Canada did not officially exist as its own country. And so we're looking at how do you exercise sovereignty, when you're dealing with a power that actually resides in London. And, so these are some of the things that the treaties are grappling with right now. But in the meantime, the business still goes on. They're still producing, and they have to, the flow of money, some of it has to come out to that community somewhere. And there's offices in each place to deal with these things. So some of the each community has some sort of a business, and they get agreements that these businesses will make, will be able to have contracts. And so they're looking at contracts, what kind of contracts, how many, and they have different aspects to the group of companies. There's a construction side, there's a custodial where you do cleaning. There's there's different parts of the business, and so which one of these different parts is going to get a share from what that company's doing, and so there's contractors and subcontractors and so on that are making something from the the industry. So it's an economic model that is is in place at the moment, and the whole sovereignty issue is still going on, it's being debated. Oh.
Another question, honorable members of the public. So if you could stand up, Benjamin, and say
Hello.
your name.
My name is Benjamin Steininger. I'm at the Max Planck Institute for History of Science in Berlin. And I'm also working a lot on the history of petrochemistry and petrocultures and so on. And I think what we saw here is a really terrible mixture between a technological problem and really a political problem. And the thing is maybe that in this colonial, really grotesque colonial situation, the technological problems are not really solvable, yet they still are part of one complex. And what I think we need to know in the West, that on the other side of the pipeline, in most cases, not maybe as grotesque as in Canada, but I don't want to see the videos from Siberia. I don't think people are treated better there, or in the Congo, or and the Amazon basin. So I think everywhere on the other side of the pipeline, maybe not here in the Weinviertel. I think the villages are quite well here, living from our small Austrian oil. But in most cases, and this is part of an extraction economy, and I think it's important to see this as the overall problem of extraction regimes and extraction politics, because otherwise we sit here in 40 years and then talk about reflecting lithium, reflecting other substances, because it will not go away if we just change the substance. And that's why I think it's important to also have the technological side here on the table. So the one thing is the technological problems, and I think there would be other ways to treat or to extract oil, and it's in fact political, technological complex that we are dealing here with.
Thanks a lot for that, Benjamin.
I kind of have a bit of a response to that. I think it is really important to foreground the question of extraction in this setting in particular, and this can even be kind of folded back onto Canada, who are some of like the biggest mining company owners in the world, and also in this kind of question of the renewable energy sector's attachment to extraction and extractivism. And so within Canada right now, in partnership with the US, there's this kind of designation of what they're calling critical minerals. And it's a set of, I think, 31 minerals that are seen as essential for the transition into a green economy. And so what we're seeing then is a kind of consistency in between the extractive oil economy and then a now extractive renewable economy that's not really going to look any different. And so you can still use these kinds of lenses of critique in relation to energy to think about this kind of question of the extraction of these minerals in particular too, because they're now part of the kind of larger energy regime in a way. And so foregrounding that question of extraction allows you to kind of keep your critical senses up and to not be seduced by the offering of critical minerals in a green future. We need to be able to push back against that before we just essentially rehash the exact same sorts of structures that prop up the oil economy.
Thanks a lot for that. More questions, honorable members of the public?
Hello, I'm Herwig Turk. I'm an artist and I'm also teaching here at the University of Applied Arts. And my question, or what I wanted to point out, is that usually in infrastructures, like really important infrastructures, the cost ratio is completely bizarre, because now these extractions, they give a lot of revenue, but of course the cleanup is not really calculated, and it falls back then into the communities or in the landowners. It would be most bizarre if the First Nation people would then have to do the cleanup, you know, like the extraction of all the benefits goes to the shareholders and then probably to the Canadian nation, and the cleanup then is the thing that the community has to do. And the second thing, when you were talking about the landscape of these tar sands, nobody mentioned the smell. I suppose that actually before you even see it, you smell it already. And also like the compounds, they can't hold back the smell. So I mean, all kind of toxic upwinds and downwinds probably also consist or construct this landscape. It was for me a really strong image because we did also the smell experiments, you know, and what does it do to a landscape where you had like really pure air and like really pure water and like these huge forests, and then you come back and you smell something completely toxic.
I think it's mainly sulfur, actually.
No, I don't exactly know what the smell is coming from, but it is bad. And people do notice it. And if you come from somewhere else and you drive through that area, you can smell it and really notice it. And I think people have kind of probably gotten used to it, but it's not something they like. I mean, it's just become part of the environment in certain areas. I mean, good thing we have winds, you know, but the whole thing is that wind is blowing it to someone else's community. And it's the same way for the flares. You know, they have they have gas flares that are burning constantly, and some of that gives off, you know, acid rain, for instance, and that ends up being deposited in parts of Saskatchewan. You know, so I mean, like, you know, it bypasses us because the wind's carrying it away, but going somewhere else, and it's going to go into the water and it goes into the lakes and that kind of thing. So, and then the whole thing about the one thing I didn't mention was the rare cancers that came out in the last. One of our board members is a doctor, and his name is Dr. John O'Connor. He's actually Irish, and he came to work in the North many years ago. And he discovered as a doctor in the North that there were so many incidences of rare cancers that are never found normally in such a small community that he raised alarm bells about it. And you know, the government and the you know, the physicians organization tried to shut him down, and so they did. They actually took you know, him out of the that college of physicians and surgeons, and he fought back, and eventually he got reinstated, and now he's like one of their board members. But the whole thing is like, you know, because the oil companies were so scared to have, you know, this kind of alarming evidence being brought out, they called him a scaremonger and, you know, other things like that. But he was vindicated. They did a study and found out, yeah, it's in the water and it's in the fish. So, you know, so you're talking about smells and you're talking about, you know, whatever it is that comes out of all these, you know, associated factors involved in the mining.
Well, yes.
Just one more comment from my side. Maybe I'm coming a little bit from another side. So we talk about oil companies and we talk about, of course, deposits we should not exploit at the end. Yeah. So why is that? I think it must be clear that I think as society we should have it in our hands. Whether we have it in our hands or not, that's another story, of course. As individuals, we haven't. That's clear. So why is that? For example, yeah, if you look then to South America, to the US, to Canada, then you have predominantly very difficult hydrocarbons. heavy oils, tar sands, shale gas, shale oil, God knows what. So they are all somehow associated with some environmental problems. A good engineering prevents that maybe, right? But for some problems, there are no solutions yet. So in literature, it's crystal clear which deposits we should leave in the ground and which we should produce. So we have a state now where we are on a very high level. We are living, all of you, I guess, let's say me, all of us, we are living on a very high standard, so to say, right? And on the highest standard, I would say, right? So there is a state. And now we would like to reach another state where we don't have to step down too much. Maybe others want to step up, right? And that's another state that we would like to reach. And this state should be a little bit more environmentally friendly or climate neutral or whatever neutral, right? Without any pollution. So we need to have a way, we have time in between somehow, but we cannot simply produce the simple hydrocarbons, which are less invasive, nearly no invasive, right? Because these hydrocarbons are somewhere in the Middle East, maybe in Russia, and there are conflicts in between countries, right? And if you want to be independent, and we see this with the Russia-Ukraine crisis in the moment, we see two things. We are bloody dependent. Yeah, it was also a surprise for me how dependent we are and how politicians start to rotate about it. Yeah, absolutely. So this means there is so huge dependency. That's one thing. The other thing is, for example, in Europe, for example, there is no agreement, I admit, but let's say governments say we are stepping out, right? So stepping out means this is not necessarily a decision of the company, that's a decision of the state. Right, this is a decision, and we are the voters, right? So it's our decision, of course, as an individual. Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, I vote for somebody, for the Green Party, but maybe it doesn't help if others do not vote for the Green Party or whatever. Yeah, so that's just a phrase now, right? So this means at the end, I think we should not say the companies, they react basically on the market, right? We cannot prevent that, I think. If we can demand via regulations, a proper engineering. This is what we can do, right? But as long as we are consuming, to be honest, right, they will produce and they do what they can do in the frame of their earnings, whatever, yeah, in the frame of what they are willing to do, and in the frame of the regulations, they will do everything, so to say, to prevent it, but in the frame of the regulations. Yeah. Yeah, of course, it's a, yeah, but
Yeah.
exactly, this is our problem. This is our problem, right? And to work on the technological side, this is, you cannot do a lot. You can develop technology, for example, right? But is it applied or not? That's not our decision somehow, right? So it's each individual, and the politician is reacting on the voters. The voters are reacting maybe on their pocket, yeah, and. So this is of course somehow a devil's staircase or whatever this is called, yeah.
Thanks. We have run out of time.
No green no green.
Yeah, let's say what gives hope. Let's say what we can get out of the current crisis is that there may be movement and people, at least in certain countries, are willing to step out. Right, takes a time, but there is a willingness at least.
Yes.
That they're going to bring oil from Venezuela, like to Europe, no?
Well,
Yes.
what we need is a paradigm shift. That
Yes.
it's going
Totally
to
agree
mean
with that.
a lot, because we have prophecies in amongst our people that there are hard times that are going to come, and I think we're seeing some of that right now because with the climate and these things going on, and shift in populations and so on, and that's something that we were warned about. So that's why we have to really preserve what we know, what our traditional knowledge is. We might need that in the future. So like, to me, that it's like a paradigm shift, because this is what I've been hearing so much about from scientists around the world, saying that this, if it gets to 2%, we're done. And how serious are we going to take that?
Thanks a lot for that, Cleo. And well, I must tell our honorable members of the public that Ernst, Holger, Cleo, Jordan, will continue discussing these difficult issues throughout the colloquium, which will be ending on Sunday. So we have touched upon lots of complexities. Hopefully, we have explored some possibilities that our artistic methodologies may open. Ernst, you will be doing the final words, but just let me thank you, Ernst, for talking about your artistic perspective. Thank you, Kat, for your thought-provoking and multi-layered performance. Thank you, Holger, for bringing the scientific perspective and for opening the doors of your lab and trusting us and teaching us about science. Thank you, Cleo, for teaching us about indigenous people. Thank you, Jordan, for bringing petrocultures on board. And Ernst, you have the final say.
Thank you very much for the Alejandra for moderating and the panelist. So we have now reached the end of the official event, and now the informal part of the evening will begin. But before we begin with the social part of this evening, I would like to thank the many people who contributed to the development and realization of the colloquium. So I will just continue with my. Firstly, a big thank to all the many participants who traveled to Vienna. Secondly, I would of course like to thank Kat Válastur, Mia, she's already gone, Mia, and Thomas Grill for realizing the performance. I would also like to thank my team, Alejandra Rodriguez, Lisa Marie Weidel, Michaela Gepolsberger, Monika Viokol. She worked for us, but now she's doing another job. But and also Leonhard Gruber, who is sick at the moment. But I also have to thank his colleague, because now I can use the laboratory, because many things, thanks to Holger Otto and his team, to Pete Arnold, Patrick Jacek, Kares Abdulhamed, and Michael Kompas. He's not here, but Thomas as well, the technician, yeah. Thanks. A long list. I
here forever.
And then also many thanks to our international cooperation partner of Petrocultures Research Group at the University of Alberta. So Jordan kinda is from the Petrocultures team, and Janet Stewart is a member of Petrocultures. She's also here tonight. And thank you to also for the workshop facilitators, Ulrike Bayerhofer and Olaf Osten. I would also thank Caroline Rauscher, Kai Drausenegger, and Johannes Krumberg for their technical support during the construction of my sculpture. And finally, I'm grateful to the Austrian Science Fund for making this research project possible. And so many thanks also to the following funders and sponsors. So the Federal Ministry for Culture, Arts, the civil service and sport, the culture section of the federal province of Carinthia, the Otto Mauerfond, and the company Duma Pumpensysteme, especially to Mr. Amada, who really supported me. Lastly, many thanks to all those I could not mention here. So until 10 o'clock, there will be time for conversation and informal exchanges. So drinks will be served, and would like to draw your attention to the special petroleum drink. He will be served in a petroleum canister. So thank you for coming, and enjoy the evening and have a nice evening. Yeah.